My name is Eric Haran. I'm an associate principal at Efficiency. My background is in supply chain management and logistics, and I've been implementing NetSuite for over 7 years with over 20 plus CPG implementations. Typically, when we see a CPG company want to evaluate an ERP like NetSuite, the primary reason is that the volume of the company is outpacing their current systems. So a lot of times we'll see companies that have challenges with demand planning, forecasting, integrating customer orders, whether that's through a direct-to-consumer channel or EDI, and ultimately wanting to streamline their warehouse management processes. So when order volumes hit a certain threshold, that's typically what we see will prompt a company to evaluate an ERP or upgrades to their integration process. Additionally, we do see what's referred to as like channel proliferation. So in this case, where a company that maybe historically has done direct consumer sales or strictly business to business or vice versa, as they evolve their channels, go into different areas, potentially Amazon, looking at other types of options, then realistically that kind of antiquated or old ERP system will not keep up with the demands. And then lastly, we do see many companies that are either PE backed that will have this type of opportunity presented to them. So once they do receive that additional funding, it's a great example or a great time to leverage that into implementing a new ERP system like NetSuite. So, the most prominent risk when you have unmanaged integrations or disconnected systems is the data or the information is not properly flowing through the ERP, which can result in financial challenges like margin analysis, costing structure, ultimately pricing of your items. So when you think about a lot of these CPG clients or customers that we work with, most of their systems will be involved with integrations, right? With direct to consumer, CPG is very, very prevalent as well as for business B2B orders or EDI orders. And so pricing can live in one system, the cost of the item could live in the ERP, but ultimately when you're trying to make business decisions on the margin you're earning on these products, it needs to all be in the central system. And so if the integrations aren't working properly, you can face some issues there. Additionally, when you're working with many prominent retailers and your EDI customers, if you are unable to keep up with EDI demands or properly have the documentation needed as part of your integrations, those opportunities can quickly be lost. So there's, time limits, delivery dates, all those types of things that need to be managed through EDI. And if you have a disconnected system, you're not going to be able to appease those customers, and you could ultimately lose their business. There are a few areas here where CFOs are typically concerned with. I think one of them we see, very frequently is cash flow visibility. So as volume increases, when you think about some of these CPG type companies, what that typically entails, it can certainly be direct to consumer, which has its own challenges, but a lot of that we see with relates to EDI or larger B2B type customers. In those instances, they have extended payment terms. So you can see things like net 30, 60, 90, and also a lot of chargebacks, deductions, and so on associated with it. So it becomes much more difficult to really have a good grasp, of that cash flow visibility. So that's a very prominent concern, whereas volume increases or the orders increase that CFOs are concerned with. Additionally, as you expand into more segments or what we're referring to here as channels, part of the challenge can be determining which channel is actually profitable, right? So where are we actually earning the best margin on our product sales? Is it through our CPG or through our direct consumer channel? Is it through EDI? Is it through international orders? Is it through domestic? So it's really important to be able to break down those costs ultimately by channel, by customer, by SKU. That's what a CFO is really going to want to see. And then lastly, as well, and this ties a little into more of the operational side of things, but ultimately super important for a CFO, excuse me, to be aware of, is demand and supply planning and forecasting, right? So these types of companies are typically low margin and very, very high volume. So in that case, they have to be very, controlled on their timelines, lead times for vendors, suppliers, contract manufacturers, so that ultimately they're holding that inventory for the least amount of time and then sending it out as quickly as possible. So those are also very big concerns as you increase the volume of transactions in the system. Alignment between CPG and operations and finance is so important, especially within a central system like NetSuite as your ERP, because everything is connected from that initial sale through the fulfillment, your cost of goods sold, and then ultimately your revenue being recognized, which is attached to that fulfillment. So inventory valuation is extremely important, and it's critical that as inventory is being added into the system through things like inventory adjustments or purchasing and receiving, that the cost of that item is correct, so that ultimately when finance is reviewing those transactions, reviewing the fulfillments, they're seeing the correct cost of goods sold captured on those transactions. Additionally, it can get more complicated with things like landed cost, which is a feature of NetSuite that's very connected to both operations and finance. The operations team really processes the landed cost information, but ultimately the finance will be creating the bills and ensuring that those are tied to the cost of the item. So something like that, which is a super prevalent feature for these types of companies, kind of ties those two teams together. Additionally, making sure that those fulfillment costs, which is going to be every single revenue channel, or I would say 99% of the revenue channels for CPG companies, is aligned with the actual cost of the item. So whether you're using average cost or standard cost, which are two of the most common in NetSuite, those fulfillments is really what's going to drive that information that the finance team cares so much about. And those fulfillments obviously come from the operations team. At the end of the day, month-end processing and reconciliation is extremely important. And operations will have in this business will have transactions flowing through the end of the month. Inventory will be transferred. It will be being fulfilled. They could have things in transit. There could be inbound shipments. And so at month end, from a financial perspective, it's very important that there's alignment between those two groups for how they want to and need to handle their books at the end of the month to ensure a proper close with any compliance requirements that they are working under. True inventory visibility means that there is a single source of truth for the inventory across the different integrated environments. So in this case, we always recommend that NetSuite acts as that source of truth, but it relies on inputs from many other systems. So, for example, when you connect NetSuite with a WMS or 3P, excuse me, a WMS system at a 3PL, we want to ensure that, of course, as inventory counts are happening at the WMS, cycle counts, adjustments, those are accurately reflected in NetSuite. And vice versa, we want to send the NetSuite information, inventory, back down to the WMS to identify discrepancies. So we build integrations in between those two systems so that if anything gets out of line, we adjust, we fix, making sure that ultimately what's the physical inventory at the 3PL location is reflected in NetSuite. At the same time, it's very important that information gets fed back into your e-commerce platform. So whether that's Shopify, Salesforce Commerce, any of those potential websites, any of the sites you may use, that NetSuite is connected to your 3PL, which is ultimately that your NetSuite environment is also connected to your e-commerce platform. That allows you to let your customers know what's in stock, what's out of stock, what can you fulfill, and have synergy across all those systems. So there's complexity, of course, that evolves when you talk about lot tracking, serialization, things of that nature. But ultimately, the best solution is making sure that you do have that inventory visibility across all those platforms so that you can make informed decisions when you do go to start placing orders, whether that be inbound or outbound. Main thing that sets us apart is our prioritization of the integration of, the architecture of the integration. So what that means is ultimately, typically NetSuite will sit at the center of the integrated system. So you can have, EDI, I've mentioned, your e-commerce platform. You can have 3PL, other types of integrations, but NetSuite is the central hub that stores a lot of your master data, your items, your customers, your vendors. And then as transactions flow through your system, NetSuite will be that central repository where things will get stored, your financial information, where all your GLs keep are tracked, your classifications, and so on. So what we do at Efficiency is we recognize with NetSuite being at that central location of the entire system architecture, building all of the associated channels and platforms and messaging between the integrated system. So one of the things we take on at the beginning of these projects is we will map out all of the integrated systems and also map out all of the integrated process flows. So what is your order to cash for direct consumer, your order to cash for EDI, your order to cash for international distributors, so on and so forth, your order to cash for Amazon. And the flip side, we'll also look at your manufacturing processes, which will predominantly be done in NetSuite or recorded in NetSuite. Your procure to pay processes that may involve integrations with your 3PL, but are also very heavily driven in NetSuite. So we really place a huge emphasis on the system architecture, developing mapping tables so that we can have data synergy between all the different systems, because that's also a very large challenge we see with these types of deals. So that system architecture that we deploy as part of our implementations is very, very important. Secondly, we have conducted extensive amounts of these types of integrations and CPG implementations. We have very industry-specific IP here at Efficiency. Over the years, we've developed templates for what we would determine to be best practice in the CPG space. So things like move to production trackers, NetSuite data templates, those integration mapping templates for some of the more common e-commerce platforms. And then as well, all of our work with different EDI partners as well lends us to be a really great resource. And then lastly, I will also mention we do have a very prominent AI assistant that we operate with called Ask Cypher. A lot of really important automation and process improvements. We utilize that for to further kind of enhance our implementation activities. So there are certainly some very consistent elements of CPG implementations. I think the first and foremost is the different order to cash life cycles or channels. So we've referred to direct to consumer quite a bit, D2C, that is very prevalent in the CPG space. We also have some of your larger EDI type customer interactions. So whether the EDI transaction is between the customer directly or trading partner and our customer, who's in NetSuite, or using EDI for inventory, it's always very prevalent in the CPG space. It's probably 99%, if not more. It's hard to think of an example where it's not involved. So those are very prevalent. Additionally, inventory management is the name of the game here, right? So whether it be lot serial tracking, multi-location, demand supply planning, there are going to be units sold, and so inventory management is going to be a huge feature that's very consistent across all clients. Additionally, we do see a lot of different types of manufacturing, but levels of manufacturing as well. So it may not be that the CPG company manufactures themselves, but they take advantage of a module in NetSuite called outsourced manufacturing, where they're creating purchase orders to their outsourced manufacturer and then building ultimately the product that they're going to sell. So there's extensive processes there as well around procure to pay. So AP payables, very, very important. And then from a financial perspective, We do have a lot of intercompany transactions associated with typically our CPG companies. Those that I mentioned earlier are potentially PE backed. Will certainly have this, as well as international transactions. So whether that's purchasing from overseas vendors, we do see a lot of international distribution as well. So there's some unique requirements about tax, as well as kind of shipping requirements, things like that that we see across these clients. It's a great question. So I think some of the most common mistakes we see is that sometimes when an implementation begins, the company sees that implementation as, hey, maybe we're going to change out our software, we're going to upgrade our software. But what it doesn't take into account is how can you actually enhance or transform some of the business operations. So what I mean by that is a lot of times when we go through these implementations, we will go through the requirements at the beginning of the implementation, and we'll ask, what are your business requirements? How do you do these things? What are your steps for direct to consumer? We do that to get an understanding of the current business process, but that doesn't mean it necessarily has to be that way in NetSuite, or it's even the most effective way to do things as a whole. So what we try to drive as we go through these conversations is actual business transformation to find the best result. Just because you've done something for 10, 5, 10, 15 years doesn't mean that's the best way to do it moving forward. So we really try to get folks out of the thought process of, hey, we've always done it this way, let's continue to do it this way, and then try to find, efficiencies or possibly better maneuvers for whatever transaction flow we may be talking about. Additionally, some of the challenges we do see are relating to data migration, specifically not or excuse me, specifically having challenges with bringing old historical data that maybe hasn't gone through a thorough review or a cleanse. ERP systems, unfortunately, notoriously, and this may not even be specific to CPG, but will hold and keep old data that you may not necessarily want to bring over to a new ERP. So it's super important that when you are upgrading to NetSuite, that you take a really long, thoughtful process on how to clean up data before bringing it into NetSuite. Um, Third, I would say one of the largest challenges is the time invested for training. So we have a very thorough, robust UAT process that we deploy as part of all of our implementations, but that is a two-way street. So there's a lot that gets generated from the efficiency side, but it also needs to be from the client side. So dedicating enough time, enough support, enough resources from the client's perspective to properly vet and test the system is super important. And then the last one, this is so critical for CPG companies, is performing a very thorough and robust mock cutover before the actual production cutover. So downtime for these types of companies can be very, very challenging because those margins we talked about earlier are small. You have to be selling products as quickly as possible, getting them out the door. So when you cut over, you want to minimize that downtime. The way to do it is to do mock cutovers ahead of time and ensure that that disruption to business is very, very small when you actually cut over. So that's a huge it's resource intensive, but will be very, very valuable for companies to make sure they minimize that downtime. So there's areas here that I wanted to call out. It's definitely not a comprehensive list, but some of the ones where we've seen some really excellent improvements. One of them is anomaly detection or something along the lines of auditing transactions. So what AI can be used for here is looking at any unusual transactions or potential issues before they become problems. So reviewing, your transactional history, establishing a baseline, and then determining if there's any type of transactions that fall outside of that baseline. It may have just been a one-off scenario that was valid, but AI can be a really valuable tool to kind of comb through all that information and then highlight areas where we may want to take a closer look. Additionally, a little bit more specific to CPG, we've seen a lot of really great use cases and examples of how demand forecasting can be powered even stronger through AI analytics. So this is very, very important, as we've mentioned many times on that margin control, is being able to forecast sales trends to ultimately optimize your inventory levels, and then determine, okay, within our supply chain, where do we need to send the appropriate amount of inventory to satisfy that demand? So super, super impactful, and those are two prominent areas. Additionally, I did want to also call out things like data review, validation, displays are super important. So things like searches, reports, graphs, dashboards, things of that nature can be super helpful and can ultimately be driven or be, I should say, created with the use of AI tools, and I think will be really, really prevalent moving forward. Yes, so there are some certain areas that ultimately AI should not be expected to solve. One of the main primary ones would be in any case of like a broken integration. It's not a really good use case for the technology, at least at this current state. The reason being is when we go in and see something that requires some sort of fix, repair, things of that nature. Certainly AI can be referenced, but ultimately there's more of a discussion analysis that needs to be happened on the intended functionality. Where is that potential issue? And kind of solving that without the use of AI. Additionally, as well, I do think there are limitations if we have some, insufficient or bad data within the system. So if we do have, we mentioned it earlier during our cutover process, but if we do get some data elements that aren't exactly accurate or have been brought over from a historic system, we can have some issues with how the AI will interpret that data, and ultimately kind of cloudy or murky up the decisions. Another area that, is kind of related here, but somewhere it may not be the best use of AI, is focusing on process design. So when I say process design, full system architecture, it certainly can be leveraged with AI, but I would not rely on it as that kind of sole decision maker. There's all sorts of different things that have to be considered, whether it's between the functional teams, the finance teams, operational, and so on. So although it can be used as a maybe a reference point, some of those system architecture decisions and designs ultimately should be, reviewed with the business IT teams and finance teams to make sure that those have the solid foundation and solid solution.